On this month, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Emplyment Equity Act. It has received some resistance from other organizations and are taking that matter to court. Well, they say it purports to allow government to prescribe demographic quotas to private employers, this regardless of whether they do business with the state. Black Business Council CEO Kganki Matabane joins us for their comment on this act. But before, of course, we begin, just yesterday we spoke to Sakeliga's CEO on this, and I think we might have that bite and stand by just to hear what he had to say. Listen in. All right, I'm hearing from my team that we don't have it at this point, but I'll just, of course, introduce Kganki. And Kganki, always a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us. And it seems that the bite I wanted to play you was obviously of joining in many other organizations representing Sakeliga in this regard, saying that they do not agree with the Employment Equity Amendment Bill. Before we get into your comments around where they stand, where do you stand with the President signing this bill?
Good morning to Melo and the ENCA viewers. Firstly, let's maybe look back. The Emplyment Equity Act came into effect in 1998, which means it's 25 years this year. And when we look at the representation, especially in the private sector, you'll realize that almost 70% of the CEOs of JSE-listed companies are white males, which is not different from 25 years ago. When you look at the Employment Equity Report, this is the report by employers that they submit to the Department of Labor Employment Equity Commission. The appointments, the promotions, medium of junior people, new entrants to the market in the private sector are basically still white males, which then tells you even 25 years from now, the situation won't change. And I think that's what prompted some of the changes that they've been introduced. For example, the introduction of a employment equity compliance certificate, because what the private sector has basically done is just to ignore the Employment Equity Act, especially those who are not doing business with government, but they are operating in South Africa. We don't have a parallel economy in South Africa, so we support that part that says we need to make sure that all companies, regardless of whether they are doing business with the state, whether they are private sector or public sector, they're supposed to comply with the laws of the country. But there's a problematic part also about the new act, which is Section 53, which basically says any company that employs less than 50 people don't have to comply with the act. And the problem with that is that what's going to happen, like it's happening with many other things, most of the companies are just going to subdivide themselves into smaller companies. So there are going to be a lot of companies that are going to form subsidiaries that have got less than 50 employees, and so that they don't have to comply. And those companies may be making billions of revenue. So there's an unintended consequence that I think the Department of Labor should have not allowed.
Yeah, it's seemingly opening a can of worms there, for the department. But earlier on, I did allude to a conversation we had yesterday with Sakeliga CEO Let's just listen into what he had to say.
The most objectionable part of this legislation is the ability that is given to one or two ministers to set quotas, to describe percentages that businesses need to comply to in their employment, and that is mostly based on race. Now, until now, businesses were, they could employ who they thought is proper and is available, and depending on their circumstances. What this bill and this act now purports to do is purports to give to one or two officials in the country, some ministers, the opportunity to tell any business in the country how many people of different races they should employ. For now, this is limited to companies with 50 or more employees, but we know how these legislation things develop. Very soon it will just be any company because the principle will already be conceded. And we think it is fundamentally unconstitutional, unacceptable anywhere in the world to have a government tell a whole economy and all the businesses in it how the composition of their employees should look like. It brings in all sorts of moral and ethical dilemmas as well, but basically that is the objectionable part.
Well, I'm sure you heard that soundbite there, Kganki, from Piet Leroux from Sakeliga, basically lamenting these said quotas, saying that they're based on race. Businesses cannot now focus on a good candidate or the best candidate for the job, but now have these quotas based on race that would need to comply with, and they're saying it's unconstitutional. Your views?
Yeah, I think that they're deliberately trying to misinterpret the intentions of the Act. The Act is trying to deal with the legacy of apartheid. And obviously, we're not expecting the beneficiaries of apartheid to support it. They benefited, they're still benefiting, and they want to continue to benefit. So I think the minister must just continue with this, because we're trying to deal with the legacy of the party. You can't leave that thing to chance, because as I said, it's 25 years into democracy, but the changes that are there are very, 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 very limited. We were almost similar to 1994, which then tells you that companies, if they are not forced by any legislation, they are not going to change on their own. So it's important that we need to have a carrot and stick, and the stick should be that if people are not complying, they should be fined a percentage of their turnover so that people can do it, because they are not doing black people any favor, they're not doing women any favor. This is our economy, all of us. We're supposed to participate fully in our economy. We should not be begging any other person, because those people are taking the resources of the country. They are benefiting from the resources of the country. Some of them benefited from apartheid. They're still benefiting from the resources of apartheid. It's important that companies in South Africa, like it happens all over the world, the demographics of the workplace represent the demographics of the country. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it seems that Sakeliga is not the only organization opposing this bill, Kganki. Also, Solidarity joined in. They taking on, legal action, seeking, legal advice on this matter. But Busa, on the other hand, I think welcoming the bill, but still having reservations and some concerns. I just want to quote here what some of those concerns include. They say, and I quote, "These complex arrangements will increase the compliance burden, which in turn then many may derail transformation, especially at a time when South Africa desperately needs economic growth to generate much needed employment." What do you make of where they stand as Busa?
Yeah, I think they also should not confuse economic growth and transformation. And transformation is not an impediment to economic growth. So it does not mean as a company transforms, it then won't grow. So I think they are confusing, but deliberately so they're confusing that, because if companies were on their own implementing what we call the spirit of economic transformation in this country, there will not be any need for any legislation to force them. But this is a reaction to the fact that things are not changing, and people are going to lose patience with government. So government has to do something, because we cannot continue to exclude the majority from playing a meaningful role in the economy. That on its own is a disaster. It's a receipt for disaster. You are likely to have people who are going to one day decide to revolt and render the country ungovernable. So it's important that we need to take everyone with us, make sure that everyone participate in the economy. They feel like this economy does. Otherwise, this is not sustainable on its own.
Well, I appreciate you speaking to me this morning. That's all the time I had with you, and thank you so much for your time. Black Business Council CEO Kganki Matabane, thank you for joining us. Well.